I'm just going to say it right in the beginning of this video. This isn't good. This is the first news article I'm covering about Uber and Lyft in 2024. And it's not a good sign of what's to come. You can see right here, Uber drivers say the job has become more competitive and that it's made their work less profitable. I've talked about this in my Should You Drive for Uber and Lyft in 2024 video. Not good, because the biggest thing, one of the biggest points of that video, especially for 2024, or this year, is the fact that there's a lot more drivers on the road. And you can see it's kind of the synopsis is that some Uber and Lyft drivers say it's become harder to make money over the past year. They say the growing number of drivers has meant increasing competition and declining pay. Driving during periods where there are fewer drivers might help boost earnings. This is something I will talk about a bit later in this video. This huge, almost, I'm going to call it the peak hour paradox, if there's like a quick phrase for that. So in here, you can see many Uber and Lyft drivers say ride-hailing has become less profitable than it used to be, and some are blaming that on the gig's popularity. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that Uber and Lyft has gotten so much more popular, not just as a service, which I feel like it's always continued to increase in terms of the popularity, but more of the fact of people considering, oh, instead of taking a Lyft and Uber, why don't I drive for them, right? And you can see Fred, a part-time Uber driver in Virginia, roughly earned $44K in 2022, but his earnings fell over 25% in the last year. And what's kind of scary is I've done some videos about this, that there might be too many drivers in 2024. I talked about this at the end of last year in 2023, and had a lot of people comment saying, hey, Mark, it's already happening. I'm already getting less rides, right? You can see right here, I would occasionally go to the airport for a ride and stop in at the Uber and Lyft waiting areas during the pandemic. Those nights, I would see the same 8 to 10 people waiting for rides. Now the lot is full each time I go past with 20 to 40 cars waiting. There's more and more people driving for Uber and Lyft. And I've talked about this in a lot of other videos, and it's scary that this is now becoming a bigger thing. And if you think about it, there's only a finite amount of rides, right? So as opposed to you getting tons of rides over and over again, that's not being the case anymore. Because, and also too, and this is something maybe I'll talk about in future videos. I don't know what the algorithm is on Lyft and Uber's end of like which driver do they hand out the ride to. Is it the bigger the better? Is it that the bigger drivers will always get the best rides, and smaller drivers will get less ones? Honestly, I don't know. That's something I'll talk about in a second as well, right? There's an increase of the increase of drivers has contributed to fewer available and lower paying trips overall, right? And here's the biggest thing. In November of 2023, Uber announced it had a record 6.5 million active drivers and carriers, right? And that's kind of ridiculous. The number of global Uber drivers has increased by 31% in 2022. And in addition, in the fall of 2022, Lyft said they have the highest number of active drivers in over 2 years, right? Tough to say when it comes to Lyft, being honest, especially with David Reisher and everything Lyft's doing. I've heard mixed results. I know some drivers say they love driving for Lyft now compared to before, during, I call it the dark era of Lyft. I know other drivers have commented on this channel saying, hey, Mark, actually it's the exact opposite. I hate Lyft now. After the dark era, if anything, it's even darker or whatever, right? And this is the biggest thing. This is the biggest kicker you can see right here. The biggest kicker. Well, elevated inflation has motivated more people to try gigs like ride-hailing. Easing COVID-19 concerns have also fueled the recent growth in drivers. That's something, I to be honest, I never thought of, but it's a huge point that, for me, I haven't thought about COVID in forever, right? I feel like that's the same with most people. But I know a lot of people, like say, who do have underlying health conditions and problems, it's still something in the back of their head. But as things kind of were moved back to normal now, it's so crazy to think it's 2024. Like, I saw this meme that was so accurate. That was like, if you think about it, 2024 to 2020 is the same period of time from 2020 to 2016. I know that sounds simple, being like, well, yeah, Mark, it's 4 years and 4 years. But when I picture 2016 and 2020, it feels like a solid 4 years of stuff that happened. I feel like 2020 almost feel like it just happened, right? I don't know. I feel like my sense of time has been so messed up since the pandemic. I know a lot of people have said that as well, but I think for a lot of people, talking now about COVID-19 specifically, have said, okay, you know what? It's pretty much over. There's been no big news about it anymore. Now I feel more comfortable maybe being around a lot of more random people and doing that more nonstop when it comes to ride sharing, right? And also talking about this, right, that there was a huge issue when it comes to driving during the pandemic, right? going down here. Here's a big thing though. Since the pandemic, to sum this up, times have changed. Driver supply has rebounded and tipping seems to have returned to normal. It will become less common for some drivers. And so it's kind of like a double whammy that back in the day, customer tips were more generous as well because people were like, shoot, I'm in the pandemic. Drivers need the money. We all know. I mean, you could argue, I know some people might disagree with this, but I kind of agree with this. I do think ride shares, people driving for Lyft and Uber, are kind of essential workers. I know I might get some hate for that, but I mean, if you think about it, there are a lot of people, like say if you're going out drinking, which I know during the pandemic wasn't as common, but if let's say you need to get to and from work, if let's say you're elderly, disabled, or handicapped, and driving's not an option for you, there's a lot of things I could say. I do think ride sharing is very important in our society, not just to go out and get drunk, which sometimes people say, just for, not getting drunk drivers off the road, which obviously is important, but I think for a lot of people it's necessary. And so during the pandemic, with things being super difficult and it being a whirlwind from day to day, people were tipping more. Now, people are not. So not only are there less rides and Lyft and Uber's paying drivers less, and Uber and Lyft's taking a bigger cut now than ever before, which I've talked about. In addition, tipping has become less common for some drivers. In addition, some have complained that changes to the platform algorithms and not increasing competition or what's truly constraining drivers' pay. That's the algorithm is something I will talk about, I think, near the end of this video in this kind of recap. I'd like to kind of look at the article, give my thoughts on certain things, and then give like a recap at the end. Because this makes me wonder, is it one of those things like the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer in a sense when it comes to drivers? Let's look into this. The changing landscape can have a big impact on hourly earnings. Rich, an Arizona Uber driver in his 70s, made over $80K in 2022, but he says it's become more difficult to make money on the platform lately. And again, these are just a couple stories, of course, among all the stories I know a lot of drivers have talked about and I've heard on this channel, all the comments, right? I'm making less per hour this year. And I think that's the big thing is you have to drive more now, and this is another huge kicker, to almost make the same amount of money. I'm making less per hour this year than I've made in the previous 3 years, right? Again, there were times I made over $2,000 a week, as high as $2,700 in 1 week. However, those days are long gone. I can't remember the last time I made $2,000 in a week. In September and October of 2023, Rich earned between $1,000 and $1,500 during the 4 weeks he drove 5 or more days, according to a document viewed by Business Insider. And here's where things get really annoying to me. However, Uber disagrees with this sentiment from drivers. Now, here's what kind of pissing me off. One, just call it like it is. I'd rather a company say, yeah, we're working on this. I don't know why Uber and Lyft, I'd say Lyft is better than this than Uber, but I don't know why Uber tries so hard to disagree with this. Here's the thing, one thing I've noticed. Of course, more people are using Uber and Lyft than ever before, and there's more drivers than ever before. But in my opinion, looking at everything, if you look at the rate of growth of more drivers being on the road is increasing faster than more passengers taking Ubers and Lyfts, right? And that's what causes this huge issue. If, let's say, every day I'm making numbers up, there were 100 new drivers and 100 new passengers, okay, it's even, right? But it's almost seems like there's and I'm making things up, 100 new drivers a day, but only 10 new passengers a day. With the increase of more and more drivers being on the road and the not as relative rate of increase of passengers taking Ubers and Lyfts, that's causing this huge issue, right? And then Uber disagrees with the sentiment. Yeah, I mean, they said the growing customer demand has helped offset the increase in driver supply. Nah, I disagree with that. Drivers remain busy and earnings are strong, they said. That's largely because we have more customers on the platform today than ever before. Here's what kind of frustrates me. That's true. I feel like this is a very easy, politician-like statement because that is true. There is more customers and people are taking Ubers and Lyfts than ever before. And yes, they're taking more trips and placing more orders than ever before. That is true. But it's not equal to the rate of increase of drivers being on the road. So that's why I just kind of hate when companies say this oh, there's more drivers there's more people taking Ubers. Yeah, they're not wrong, but it's kind of like they're arguing, what's it called, the straw man argument, I think, where they're kind of arguing against a different point to try to validate what they're saying. And it's no, yeah, that's true what you're saying, but it's not the full truth. Because, yeah, if there's, say, I'm making this up, like I said, 10 new extra passengers every single day, there is more people taking Ubers and Lyfts. But if there's 100 new drivers a day, and again, I'm making those numbers up, if there's 100 new drivers a day, there's still a huge disconnect, right? And then in November of last year, the amount of active consumers has grown over 15%. The number of trips has increased 25% year over year, and the number of monthly trips per consumer matched an all-time high of 5.7. So not only are there more people using Uber, but the people who are taking more and more trips, right? This could be because of COVID. It could be because of a bunch of different things. The median U.S. driver's earnings per utilized hour, including tips and incentives, has nearly grown by 30% over the last 6 years, the spokesperson said. I feel mixed about that. That is a very complicated statement in and of itself, right? But Lyft did not respond, right? I don't think that's more of a negative thing. I know a lot of times that seems like a red flag. I don't think so. I just think Lyft's like, maybe they have a point, right? And here's the big thing. This is one kind of, like I said, the peak hour paradox. The one unique thing that is very interesting now as a driver. If you look at strategies, and I've done a bunch of videos like how to make more money driving and everything. For drivers concerned about rising competition, there's one possible solution: start your shift early in the morning, or basically a non-peak hour, which goes against everything I've ever said, which goes against everything every YouTuber's ever said, which goes against pretty much driving one-on-one from Lyft and Uber. Everyone knows. I remember when I first started driving years ago in 2015, dude, Friday and Saturday nights. That was kind of the state. Everyone knew that you made a good amount of money driving on Friday and Saturday nights. Now, I've interviewed a lot of drivers in person and talked to them. If anything, I've had some drivers say, yeah, you know what? I don't drive on Friday and Saturday nights anymore. It's too congested. It's too packed. I don't get that many rides. There's not good services anymore. I make more money on a Wednesday night, for example, right? On like a normal weekday, I can't imagine this. This Fred says he starts at 3:30 a.m. He drives to 6 a.m. To 6:30 to 4 at his office job, then drives again from 7:30 to 8. That is ridiculous. How? Another person, Rich, said it's not uncommon for him to start working at 4:30. I will say, I have had a lot of drivers tell me that, and I've mentioned this before in a bunch of videos, they love waking up at, say, 3:30 and go from, 4 to 10. They say it's a great window to drive. I can't imagine doing that. I'm way more of a night owl, to be honest. But hey, if you can do that and it works for you, awesome. Being honest, things are not looking good for a few different things. One, bridging the gap. I talked about this in my Should You Drive for Uber and Lyft video in 2024. I do have it listed below in the description. I know it's kind of long. It's like an hour long, which I think is one of the longest videos I've ever filmed on YouTube ever. But I really want to go in depth on it about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this is a big point I brought up, that looking at this article, there is a lot more, things have increased when it comes to inflation, when it comes to being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. There's a lot more things you have to worry about now, right? And I talked before that if you look at kind of the gap increasing, what I'm talking about is you have to spend more money on gas, maintenance, inflation, it's gotten more expensive, but you're not making as much money as an Uber and Lyft driver now. That gap has to be bridged. Either you have to accept that you have to make less money, Uber and Lyft has to try to pay you more money or whatever. And like I said, drivers are getting paid way less than they ever used to before. And this is existing even before this situation. In addition, Uber and Lyft's taking out a bigger cut. When I first started driving, it was a hard 20% they took. Now it's kind of fluctuates. It's kind of weird. I'd say on average, Uber and Lyft takes half of drivers' earnings, which are already lower than before. And the third thing on top of this is now you talk about inflation, the fact that oil changes are more expensive. Maintenance your car is more expensive. The depreciation on your vehicle is more expensive. If you're renting a vehicle, rentals now are a lot more expensive than they used to be. I haven't really talked about this in a lot of videos. I mentioned it here and there. Back in the day, Lyft Express Drive had a feature, or I don't know if I call it a feature, more of like a incentive, I think is a better word for this. And I'm not making this up. If you rented a car through Lyft, and you did 60, I think it was 63 or 64. I don't know why that specific number. But if you did 63 rides or more in a week, you could rent that car for free. In addition, the more rides you did, I remember this, you pay less money. It was like if you did 20 rides or more in a week, you spend only, I don't know, $20 less or $50. Basically, the more that you drove, the less you had to spend on that rental. So Lyft was like, hey, the more that you drive, the less money you spend, and the more money you get. So back in the day, it was actually a good idea to rent a car. You're like, hey, I can rent a car. I do 63 rides in a week, which would take you about 30-ish hours. 63 rides in a week, that rental's completely free. Now that does not exist. And not only does that not exist, rentals are now more expensive than they used to be, right? So things are getting a lot more tricky. It's unfortunate too, because then you get into the second point, like I said, is on top of all of this then, it's now harder and harder for you to get a ride. And this brings up the algorithm. This is something I gotta be honest, I might do some more research on to find any, if I can, nitty-gritty data. I'm assuming there isn't, if I have to be blunt, because this is probably behind the scenes with Lyft and Uber. But this is what I wonder. There are a lot of drivers I've interviewed that love driving for Lyft and Uber and are making more money than ever before. A lot of people watching this video might think I'm making that up, but it's true, right? This is very true. I have talked to drivers making 6 figures, and I'm not exaggerating, who drive for Uber and Lyft, and they love it. They get all these high-paying rides and everything. And to a lot of drivers, you're like, kind of like that, what's that meme? I can't remember that meme where it's like, you guys are getting paid? Like that kind of sensation. I think a lot of drivers are like, wait, you're making 6 figures. You're getting all these rides nonstop. What are you talking about? And this makes me wonder, is there some kind of, use that analogy of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, when it comes to drivers, that the bigger drivers, the ones who are so high rated that are really high up on the tier list of Uber and Lyft, which does kind of exist. It's very loose, but I think Uber has more of a dedicated tier list of like your type of driver, like a diamond driver or platinum or gold or whatever. That, like I said, I've talked to some drivers who are like, yeah, I've been driving for 8 years, but I'm still getting a lot of money and blah, blah. Could it be that Uber and Lyft says, hey, these drivers we know get so many ratings, so many high ratings, and do so well, we're going to keep giving them a bunch of rides. And then maybe, and this is my theory, maybe when it comes to starting drivers, we're going to give them a lot of rides because they just started out. We don't want to disincentivize them to stop driving. And if you're in that middle, you're kind of screwed, right? It's very similar in an odd way because, again, this is all distribution algorithms. And there's a lot of studies that have been done about algorithms and statistics. If anything gets more into like statistical analysis more than anything, but it's actually very relevant, oddly enough, to Tinder and dating apps. I've said this before to a lot of people that I look at Uber and Lyft kind of similar to sales and matchmaking. I know it sounds very weird because people think they're like, no, it's ride sharing. But when it comes to Tinder, in case you know, when it comes to the Tinder algorithm, if, let's say, people swipe right, in case you don't know, swipe right on Tinder, it's an online dating platform that allows you to match with people. I know it seems random, but it's very, very relevant. The way the Tinder algorithm works is if, let's say, a lot of people swipe right on you, meaning a lot of people find you attractive, Tinder will continue to boost you in the search results because Tinder says, hey, this person is very attractive because a lot of people are saying they want to match with them and everything. And this could incentivize people to stay on the platform. We're going to push them high on the search results. When you start out on Tinder, same thing. Because obviously Tinder doesn't want you to go on there. You get no matches and you're like, sup sucks, and you close out. So Tinder actually boosts you in the beginning if, like, say, you're someone who just signed up. But if you're in that middle, where you've been on Tinder for a while, and, like, say, for whatever reason, the algorithm or people don't swipe right on you a lot, Tinder will actually not necessarily boost you lower, but just not boost you as high as, like, say, compared to other people. And it's unfortunate. This is why you hear a lot of stories. Again, a whole other subject, definitely a whole other subject for a whole other video. Though a lot of guys say, oh, you know what, man? I swiped right on Tinder for like an hour a day for a month. I only got 3 matches. We're in that kind of middle period. It's kind of unfortunate. I know this sounds very random and very left field, but remember, there is certain matchmaking algorithms that when, let's say, someone says, hey, I want an Uber, I want a Lyft, there is an algorithm in the back of Uber and Lyft when it comes to the coding that says, all right, here's how we're going to distribute this ride to the drivers in the area. And it's tough because it is tough to say, honestly. I don't know if it's very comparable to Tinder. It might be, it might not be, right? Because obviously your acceptance rate probably has an element to this. How long you've been driving probably has an element to this. Your rating probably has an element to this. There's probably all these different algorithmic factors that determine for Uber and Lyft's end who should get this ride. Driver A or driver B or driver C or driver D or basically all these different drivers. And let's say for whatever reason, the algorithm doesn't favor you with everything I've said before in this video in terms of like drivers getting paid less, Uber and Lyft taking out a bigger cut, people spending more money, renting being more expensive, the list goes on and on. You're like, shoot, I'm not favored by the algorithm. I'm not getting that many rides. Not only am I getting way less money in general for all these different factors, but now I'm not even getting the low-paying rides than I used to, right? It's kind of this thing where you're like, well, I'm already not getting that much money. And now on top of that, I'm not getting these low-paying rides that I used to get. At least I used to get the rides. Now I'm not even getting the rides. And it's becoming more and more unfortunate to be a driver as a result. However, if let's say you happen to be favored by the algorithm, like I've talked to some drivers who are loving driving for Uber and Lyft, which I know probably shocks a lot of people on this channel. I've interviewed a lot of drivers who love it. It might be maybe a better time for you to drive. Honestly, I don't know. Because like I said, and this is partly true, huge asterisk, there are more people driving for Uber and Lyft than ever before, and more people taking an Uber and Lyft than ever before. But the taking is the bigger thing. And like I showed you in the article, and this is the big, big one, that yes, there are more people taking Ubers and Lyfts than ever before, and there's more drivers than ever before. But the problem is, like I said, you have this huge kind of spread where, yes, both are increasing, but the rate of increase of more drivers is definitely bigger than the rate of increase of more passengers. It's becoming more unfortunate. And the last thing which I want to talk about, because you may be wondering, okay, like, what do I do? There's a lot of different solutions to this. I think I'm thinking of two. One, like I talked about in the Uber and Lyft 2024 video, is a potential guaranteed minimum wage. If you're in California, if you're in New York, hey, even if you don't get one ride an hour, who cares? You're still going to make a minimum hourly guarantee. And you never know. If you do the math out, this is going to be another video, or somebody could do a dedicated video on, you actually might make more money with everything being considered, not getting a ride than getting a ride. Potentially. Potentially. That's just the word potentially. But anyway, no issue there. But of course, in most parts of the country, you don't have a minimum hourly guarantee. Hopefully in the future that might change, and this could help kind of alleviate this issue, or at least you know you're getting some money. Because remember, you go on the road, not get a ride or get one or two rides, and not only make little money, it's very possible for you to make negative money, especially if you're renting, especially if you factor in all these different other elements. So this brings up that first point. Hopefully, maybe someday there'll be a minimum hourly guarantee. The second one, which I talked about earlier, is the peak hour paradox. In every video I've ever done about Lyft and Uber, I say peak hours, 7 to 9 a.m., 5 to 7 p.m., Friday and Saturday nights. Peak hours. It may be not a bad idea, especially if you drive full time, to consider driving the off-peak hours, which goes against everything, like I said before, goes against everything that we know about Lyft and Uber. It's kind of like going completely against the grain, but that might be what you have to do. Maybe test it out. I say this to a lot of people, especially with me being a former accountant. When I was driving, I would always keep track. Every week I'd be like, okay, let me drive in this hour. How much do I make? Do I get rides? Do I not? I'd always kind of be keeping track of all these different metrics in the back of my head. Or, like I said, I even had a spreadsheet tracking everything. Maybe if you're like, hey, you know what? I drive, I'm making this up, 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. on a Friday night. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do that on a Wednesday night or a Tuesday night and see, do you get more or less money? And granted, maybe you do driving, like, you know what? I'm not gonna lie, I tried driving on 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. I got nothing. It wasn't worth it. But hey, at least you did it once just to test it out. It didn't work out. You can go back to that Friday night. But you never know. You can maybe do that and realize, oh, you know what? I actually made a lot of money on this Wednesday. It was actually easier to get rides than it probably will be, right? And this way, like I said, I've talked to a lot of drivers here in LA, for example. Again, this is a very LA thing, but again, this could be very indicative of the rest of the country. I've talked to drivers in LA on, like, say, a Friday night. I'm like, hey, how's your night going so far? Like, is it busy? Blah, blah, it's a Friday night. And the guy's like, nah, man, it's actually slow. Like, I'm not getting anything. It's pretty quiet. There's no bonuses tonight. There's no incentives. There's no surges. Like, there's nothing. I'm kind of taking what I can get. Like, usually I pick and choose, like, this ride's cheap. This ride's not cheap, blah, blah, blah. I got to take what I can get. And this is a story I'm hearing from a lot more drivers that makes you kind of feel like there's only a certain amount, I mean, and technically there is, of food on the table, and you have to grab whatever you can. And this is a story that's becoming kind of all too common with drivers. I don't know. And again, I'm hoping things do change in 2024 when it comes to this, because like I mentioned that Uber and Lyft 2024 video of should you drive or not this year, that was my biggest concern. Is there being too many drivers? And although, yeah, there's more and more passengers and blah, 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 it doesn't really give you the full picture that there's only a finite amount of rides. And depending on the algorithm and all these different factors, it could just not be in your favor, which makes it, in my opinion, less and less worth it to be a driver overall. I know a lot of people want to know, is Uber worth it? Is Lyft worth it? I don't know. I mean, again, for all my drivers out there, let me know what you think in the comments in terms of like your own personal situation. I have had drivers tell me they love driving right now, and there's been not any issues. But I've been hearing more and more, and I hate to say it, I feel like more and more on top of that, it will become more common for drivers to say, hey, it's just not worth it anymore.